Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willowbrook, a peaceful town where everyone knew each other, and the most exciting event was usually someone's overzealous lawn care routine. But for Ethan, a typical homeowner who prided himself on his neatly manicured garden and family-friendly home, today was anything but ordinary. It was trash day, the one day of the week when the streets seemed to come alive with the hum of neighborhood routines. Ethan had spent the weekend clearing out old items from his attic, and as part of his cleanup, he found his late mother-in-law's old ceramic gnome collection, a task that was more dreadful than nostalgic. The gnomes, each a bizarre and slightly unsettling relic, were now destined for the trash. After spending hours carefully disassembling and bagging the porcelain pieces, he had filled several bins to the brim with broken gnome fragments, pointy hats, and vacant painted eyes. With the final remnants of the collection loaded into the trash bins, Ethan dragged the overflowing containers to the curb. As he bent down to secure the last bag, his eyes caught sight of her, the one person in Willowbrook who could turn an otherwise peaceful morning into a scene of chaos. Her name was Linda Watts, but in the neighborhood, everyone referred to her as the Enforcer, for her unwavering devotion to the community's rules and her self-appointed role as the gatekeeper of order. Linda stood at the edge of her pristine front porch, arms crossed over her chest, her chihuahua, Princess Sparkle, nervously tucked under her arm. The little dog trembled in her grasp as Linda stared at Ethan with an icy, disapproving gaze, her eyes narrowing in judgment. Ethan waved at her, offering a friendly smile, but it went unnoticed, as Linda's expression remained fixed in her typical scowl. As always, it seemed, she was on the lookout for any potential infraction. Ethan shook his head, trying to dismiss the tension building in his chest. After all, it was just another Tuesday morning. Or so he thought. With a deep sigh, he began walking back toward the house when the unmistakable sound of sirens pierced the air. Within minutes, 2 police cars came screeching to a halt right in front of his driveway. The officers, both large and stern, exited their vehicles and approached him with purpose. The officer who spoke first, Officer Stevens, was tall, with a face hardened by years of experience. He wasted no time in cutting to the chase. "Mr. Wallace, we've received a complaint about suspicious activity," Officer Stevens said in a clipped tone, his gaze scanning the area around him, as if looking for the source of the issue. "Suspicious activity?" Ethan blinked, baffled. "What do you mean?" "We were informed that you were loitering near the trash cans and acting in a way that seemed off," the officer continued. Ethan's mind raced, his heart beginning to beat faster. He looked over at Linda, who was still standing on her porch, her smug expression unwavering. He couldn't help but feel a sinking sensation in his stomach. It didn't take a detective to figure out that Linda was behind this complaint. As Officer Stevens pressed further, Ethan explained the situation, the gnome cleanup, the overflowing trash bins, and even offered to show them some of the discarded ceramic pieces, but the officers simply nodded, clearly unimpressed. After what felt like an eternity, they left, muttering about wasted resources. Linda, however, remained rooted in place, her self-satisfaction practically radiating from her. Ethan was seething now, his patience completely spent. He wanted to march over and confront her right then and there, but he knew it wouldn't end well. His wife, Laura, came outside just in time to stop him. "Don't, Ethan. It's exactly what she wants. Just let it go," she said, trying to calm him down. It wasn't easy to let it go, but as the officers drove away, Ethan reluctantly accepted that perhaps the best course of action was to ignore Linda for now. Still, as the day wore on, the incident lingered in his mind, fueling a deep sense of injustice. Something had to be done. Ethan wasn't the type to back down easily, and this situation had ignited a fire in him. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an unexpected and strange turn of events that would forever change his relationship with his seemingly perfect neighbor. It wasn't the first time Linda had gone too far, but this time, it felt different. Ethan couldn't let it go. He stood in his driveway, fuming, staring at Linda's house, which now seemed more like a fortress of hypocrisy than a well-maintained home. The officers were gone, and with them, his opportunity to explain the absurdity of the situation. But as he turned to go back inside, he felt something brewing inside him, a sense of justice that he couldn't ignore. "Laura, I can't just let this slide," Ethan said, shaking his head as he walked into their living room. Laura, who had been sitting on the couch, glanced up from her book. She sighed but didn't argue this time. "I know, but please don't do anything rash. You know how she is." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Rash? She just called the cops on me for taking out the trash, Laura. She's made my life miserable for months, and I've had enough of it." "I get it, but let's not make this worse. Let's talk about it tomorrow after you've had some time to cool off." That night, as the evening settled in and the kids went to bed, Ethan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in their bed, replaying the scene over and over in his head. The way Linda stood there on her porch, that self-satisfied smirk on her face, the way she had made him feel like a criminal in his own neighborhood. It wasn't right. At around 2 a.m., his thoughts shifted. He needed to know what made Linda tick. What could have driven her to escalate things to this level? And why had she called the cops over something as trivial as garbage? This wasn't about trash. This was about power. And power, he knew, could often stem from the smallest of things, an HOA rulebook, for example. The next morning, after a restless night, Ethan sat down at the computer. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his tired face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he typed in Linda's name. He was searching for any hint of a crack in her perfect facade, something that would explain why she felt entitled to make everyone else's life miserable. The results were underwhelming. Linda's online presence was minimal, just a LinkedIn profile, a mention in the local newspaper about a gardening award she'd won, and a few mentions from the neighborhood newsletter about her volunteer work. Nothing suspicious. But then, Ethan remembered something. About a month ago, a crew had been working on the phone lines near Linda's property. He remembered seeing a technician fiddling with something near her backyard. Maybe it was nothing, but then again, maybe it wasn't. There was one way to find out. The following morning, Ethan stood by his front window, binoculars in hand, trying to act as casual as possible. He had decided to take a closer look at Linda's backyard. For the next few hours, he observed through the binoculars, pretending to watch birds, while his gaze was fixed firmly on Linda's house. Every so often, he'd glance at the sky, pointing his binoculars upwards, but all the while, his eyes were trained on Linda's every move. Then, at around noon, Linda emerged from her house. She was holding a large black garbage bag in her hand, looking hurried and agitated. Ethan's heart rate quickened. Why would she be carrying a bag so heavy? What was she hiding? As Linda walked to the back of her yard, Ethan's suspicion grew. She was digging. Something wasn't right. Ethan's hands gripped the binoculars tighter, his breath shallow. He watched as Linda hastily buried the bag in the ground. His mind raced. What was going on in that perfectly manicured yard? Linda went back inside, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. He knew he had to investigate further, but he had to be careful. He grabbed a small gardening trowel from the shed and made his way to the spot where she had been digging. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone as he replayed the morning's incident over and over. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. How dare Linda make such a ridiculous complaint? His blood boiled at the idea that she thought she had the right to ruin his morning just because he took out his trash. But beneath that fury, a new feeling emerged, curiosity. What kind of person was Linda really? What drove her to act with such authority, especially when it came to enforcing rules that no one else seemed to care about? I need to know more about her, Ethan muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the street outside. There she was again, standing on her porch, holding her tiny chihuahua, Princess Sparkle. That dog, always trembling and looking up at her with complete obedience, seemed almost like a symbol of Linda's control over her domain. But Ethan knew he couldn't just sit around and stew in his frustration. He needed to act. But how? The next day, after work, Ethan began his research. His first instinct was to do what any modern suburbanite would do: Google Linda. What he found, however, was underwhelming. Her social media presence was practically non-existent, and the only professional details that popped up were from her LinkedIn profile, where she listed herself as a part-time accountant. There was also a brief mention in the local paper about her having won a neighborhood award for her meticulous gardening skills. She had managed to slip under the radar, blending in perfectly as a quiet, rule-abiding member of the community. But something felt off. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Linda than her pristine image. He needed to dig deeper. As he continued his search, Ethan remembered something strange. About a month ago, some workers had been installing new phone lines near Linda's house. He recalled seeing a technician fiddling with a box near her backyard, but it hadn't seemed important at the time. However, now it was the only lead he had. The following day, armed with binoculars and a heightened sense of suspicion, Ethan decided to stake out Linda's backyard. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a spy movie, but there was no turning back. He had to know what was going on. So, with the patience of a man who had endured enough from his neighbor, he sat on his front porch, pretending to be engaged in some casual birdwatching. For hours, Ethan observed Linda's backyard. He watched the occasional movement of leaves and the fluttering of birds as he kept his eyes on the target. He had no idea what he was hoping to see, but he felt a deep need to find something that would explain her behavior. Around noon, Linda appeared outside. She was carrying a large black garbage bag, and there was an odd urgency in her step. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Why would she be carrying such a heavy bag? His suspicions grew stronger. He quickly adjusted his binoculars to focus on Linda's movements as she walked to the far corner of her yard. His breath caught in his throat as he watched her dig a shallow hole in the ground. His mind raced. What was she hiding? What was in that bag? He continued watching as Linda hastily buried the bag, covering it with dirt before returning inside her house, oblivious to the man watching her every move. Ethan didn't waste a moment. He knew what he had to do. Quietly, he gathered a small gardening trowel from the shed and made his way to the burial site. His hands trembled slightly as he dug into the soft earth, pulling up the heavy bag that Linda had discarded. He was careful, afraid of damaging whatever secret she was trying to hide. When the bag was free from the ground, Ethan opened it with a mix of curiosity and dread. Inside, he found a collection of papers. His heart raced as he rummaged through the contents, which appeared to be flyers advertising Linda's bookkeeping services. There was a stack of them, some crumpled, others neatly folded. It didn't take long for Ethan to make the connection. Linda had been running an illegal business from her home, violating the very rules she loved to enforce for everyone else. He stared at the flyers in his hand, his mind racing with the implications. Linda, the very person who had called the cops on him for taking out trash, had been breaking the rules all along. The HOA had strict guidelines about no commercial activities being run out of residential properties, and Linda had been secretly operating a business right under their noses. For a moment, Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had come knocking. But what was he going to do with this information? Confronting Linda directly would only make things worse. She would deny everything, lawyer up, and probably accuse him of planting the evidence. No, he needed something bigger, something that would force her to face the consequences. As he stood there, holding the incriminating flyers in his hands, Ethan's thoughts turned to the internet. He had seen countless stories online of people exposing hypocrisy and injustice in their communities, and now he had his own story. He wasn't sure exactly how or where to start, but one thing was clear: he was going to make sure Linda paid for what she had done. The next day, Ethan sat at his computer, his mind racing. He had everything he needed to expose Linda, but there was one problem: how to do it without getting caught. It wasn't like he could just walk over to her house and demand answers. No, this was going to take a little more finesse. It had to be done in a way that would not only hold Linda accountable but also avoid any backlash on his part. After a quick brainstorming session, Ethan decided to take the issue online. He was no stranger to Reddit, having spent countless hours reading through various threads. The idea came to him almost immediately: he could post his findings on the subreddit for petty revenge. That would get people's attention. After all, everyone loves a good story about someone getting their just desserts. Ethan spent the next few hours crafting his post. He detailed the entire situation, starting with the gnome incident and the ridiculous 911 call Linda had made. He described the tension that had been building between them, culminating in her attempt to destroy his morning. Then, he wrote about his investigation, his observations through binoculars, Linda's strange behavior, and his discovery of the buried garbage bag. But the real kicker was the evidence. Ethan had taken a few blurry photos of Linda digging the hole in her backyard and of the flyers he had found. He included them in the post, making sure they were incriminating enough to draw attention, but not so clear that anyone could immediately identify him. When he hit post, Ethan felt a rush of exhilaration. He was about to make sure Linda's hypocrisy was exposed to the world. People would see her for what she truly was: a petty, self-righteous neighbor who thought the rules didn't apply to her. The response came almost immediately. Within minutes, the comments began to flood in. People were outraged, amused, and full of suggestions on what Ethan should do next. Some people advised him to report Linda to the HOA. Others suggested he contact the local news. One person even joked about replacing her garden's prized petunias with plastic flamingos. But one comment stood out above the rest. It was from a user named XHOBoard, a former HOA member, who had some shocking advice. Report her to the IRS, the user wrote. If she's running a business without declaring it, she's breaking the law. The IRS will handle her much better than your HOA ever could. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't even considered the IRS. It was perfect. Linda's bookkeeping business was small, but the violation of tax laws was serious. He had the evidence, and he knew what he had to do next. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he reread his Reddit post one last time. He had spent hours crafting the perfect narrative, carefully detailing the absurdity of the situation. From Linda's ridiculous complaint about his trash to his amateur detective work that uncovered her secret business, he had laid it all out for the world to see. He knew he couldn't confront her directly: she would deny everything and probably retaliate with some legal threats. But this would make her face the consequences of her actions. When he finally hit post, a strange mix of relief and excitement washed over him. There was no turning back now. He had just exposed Linda for the hypocrite she was. Ethan didn't wait long before the floodgates opened. The comments came rushing in. Some people were furious on his behalf, others found the whole situation hilarious, and a few offered suggestions for how he could make Linda's life more difficult. It felt oddly satisfying to see so many people rally behind him. But then came the bombshell comment that would change everything. A user named XHOBoard posted a simple yet devastating suggestion: report her to the IRS. If she's running a business from her home without declaring it, she's committing tax fraud. The IRS will handle her faster and more efficiently than any HOA or neighborhood gossip ever could. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't considered the IRS. The more he thought about it, the more perfect the idea seemed. Linda had been running an unreported bookkeeping business, all while acting as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules. This was bigger than a petty revenge story. This was about bringing her down in a way that would truly make her face the consequences of her actions. Without wasting any time, Ethan began gathering his evidence. He took screenshots of the Reddit post, anonymizing the names of those who had offered advice, and made copies of the HOA rules that Linda had violated. He even found some client testimonials on Linda's public Facebook page, confirming that she had been conducting her business out of her home. Everything he needed to make his case was right in front of him. The following day, Ethan carefully filled out a report for the IRS, attaching all the necessary documentation and evidence of Linda's unreported business activities. Once the report was submitted, Ethan sat back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had done something that would shake the very foundation of Linda's perfect suburban life. He told Laura about his plan, and while she was initially shocked, she understood. "You had no choice," she said, her voice laced with concern. "She brought this on herself." Ethan nodded. But a part of him couldn't shake the unease. Was this the right thing to do? Was he taking things too far? He tried to push those doubts aside. After all, Linda had gone after him for something as trivial as taking out the trash. This was payback, and he felt justified. The waiting game began. It didn't take long before the first sign that Linda's world was about to crumble appeared. He was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee, when he saw two black sedans pull up outside Linda's house. Several stern-faced individuals in dark suits emerged from the cars, carrying briefcases. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The IRS had arrived. He watched from his window, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anxiety. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty, knowing that this moment was the beginning of the unraveling of Linda's perfect life. But she had brought it on herself, right? She had crossed the line first. For the next few days, Ethan kept a close eye on Linda's house. He had no intention of directly confronting her, but he couldn't help himself from checking to see how things were playing out. The IRS agents had been at her house for hours, their cars parked out front, while Linda's pristine lawn seemed to grow less and less perfect. Her manicured hedges, once the pride of the neighborhood, looked slightly unkempt. Her dog, Princess Sparkle, no longer trembled in her arms but barked incessantly at the neighbors who dared walk by. Ethan's curiosity grew as the days passed. He had seen people lose their composure before, but the sight of Linda's unraveling life was strangely satisfying. It was a slow process, like watching a house of cards collapse one piece at a time. Then came the letter. Ethan wasn't surprised when it arrived, but seeing it in her mailbox felt like the final confirmation that Linda's facade was cracking. It was from the HOA, a notice of violation for running a business from her home. Apparently, one of her neighbors had tipped them off about her unreported bookkeeping practice. The letter stated that Linda could face hefty fines or legal action if she didn't cease her business immediately. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had never been a fan of Linda's overbearing ways, and now, he was watching her fall from grace. But the best part was yet to come. Rumors started circulating around the neighborhood. Whispers spread about Linda's finances, her potential bankruptcy, and the possibility that she might lose her house. Some neighbors even began talking about how Linda would have to sell everything and move in with family members. The rumors didn't just stay within the neighborhood, either. Linda's once perfect reputation began to crumble. Her status as the HOA enforcer, the model citizen, had come to an abrupt end, replaced by whispers of financial mismanagement, secret businesses, and tax fraud. The weeks that followed were a blur of chaos for Linda. The IRS audit had revealed that she had been underreporting income for years, claiming deductions that didn't quite add up. The bookkeeping business that she had once run from the comfort of her own home had led to significant back taxes and penalties, all of which were now due. The HOA had slapped her with a fine so large that it seemed impossible for her to recover. Neighbors who had once feared and admired her now watched from their windows as Linda's perfect life crumbled. Her meticulously kept lawn was overtaken by weeds, her house became neglected, and even Princess Sparkle seemed to be a shadow of her former self, barking at anything and everything that moved. The pristine image of Linda, the model neighbor, had been shattered, replaced with an image of panic and desperation. Ethan watched it all unfold, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. He had done nothing to directly ruin Linda's life, she had done that all on her own. She had crossed the line first, making a spectacle of his trash day and calling the cops on him over nothing. And yet, as her financial troubles deepened, and her reputation took a massive hit, Ethan found himself questioning whether he had gone too far. It wasn't just the HOA violation and the IRS audit that had done the most damage. No, the real blow came when the rumors about Linda's finances spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. It was said that she had lost everything. The house, the lawn, the perfect life, everything she had worked so hard for was slipping through her fingers. The final blow came when Ethan overheard two neighbors talking about Linda's decision to sell her house. The rumors were true. Linda was facing bankruptcy and had no choice but to leave her home. It wasn't exactly homelessness, but it was a major downgrade. The woman who had once seemed untouchable was now facing the reality of losing everything. Ethan's satisfaction was tempered by the guilt that had been creeping up on him since the IRS audit. Yes, Linda had deserved what was happening to her. After all, she had been the one to call the cops on him for the most trivial of reasons, and her hypocrisy knew no bounds. But as he stood on his front porch, watching her house slowly deteriorate, he couldn't help but feel a pang of remorse. The rumors about Linda's impending homelessness circulated quickly. Of course, it wasn't true. Linda wasn't truly homeless, but she was being forced to sell her house and move in with her sister. Still, the whispers about her finances, her failed business, and the IRS audit were enough to make her seem like a cautionary tale to the rest of the neighborhood. Ethan couldn't help but feel a small sense of justice, though. After all, she had brought this upon herself. She had used her power to make his life miserable, and now, the tables had turned. But the satisfaction was fleeting. He knew that karma wasn't always as sweet as it seemed. In the end, Ethan found himself standing in front of Linda's now vacant house, staring at the "For Sale" sign in the front yard. He had taken a strange sense of satisfaction in watching her life unravel, but it wasn't the victory he had hoped for. It felt hollow. She had been the architect of her own downfall, but Ethan couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that maybe he had gone too far. After all, Linda hadn't ruined his life. She had simply irritated him with her petty rules and self-righteous attitude. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't worth bringing down the entire house of cards for something so trivial. As he thought about it, Ethan realized something. He had learned a valuable lesson. The internet, the place where he had posted his revenge, wasn't always the answer. It could be a place for growth and learning, but it could also be a platform for petty revenge. And that was something Ethan didn't want to be a part of anymore. So, he did something he hadn't thought he'd ever do, he deleted the post. There was no point in keeping it up. He didn't need the validation of strangers online. He had learned that revenge, especially online, wasn't the answer to his problems. The neighborhood would continue without Linda, and while her absence might bring a sense of peace, Ethan knew that true satisfaction came from letting go of the past and moving forward.